and constantly thirsty with no way to get water. And then also down there is Potiphar's wife, who is a Bible character that lied about Joseph in order to have him be thrown in prison. Also, two of them get into a fight, and at this point Dante's so giddy about all this torture stuff that he enjoys the fight, and then Virgil rebukes him and says, no, don't enjoy their fighting, but it's good that they're suffering, but don't enjoy it too much, and then they leave. So then, walking out of the 8th layer of hell, they walk into this corridor that's incredibly dark. Dante begins to make out in the darkness something that he describes as towers, but as he gets closer, he realizes that these are not towers. Instead, these are giants, I'm controlling myself, who are stuck in the ground from their stomach down. Or in other words, it's just the top half sticking out. And all of these giants are in a circle around a huge well. There is one giant by the name of Nimrod who is blowing a trumpet, but whenever he tries to speak to the pair, what he says is completely indiscernible. Virgil explains that Nimrod had the idea to build the Tower of Babel in the Bible, which is the tower that people tried to build in order to get to heaven, and for his insolence he's been punished that no one can ever understand him. Eventually they come across a giant named Ultrakill, who is not frozen or stuck in a new guard, and asks for his help to go down the well. Initially, Antaeus is afraid to go down to the 9th layer, but then Dante says that he can make him famous by writing about him in the story. So Antaeus agrees, and he holds out his hand, to which the two men climb onto it, to give you a scope for how big this giant is. He then climbs down the well and drops them off onto a frozen lake. They are now in the 9th layer of hell, freezing. As the previous 2 layers, it is subdivided this time into 4 parts. The first part is kindred or family betrayal. The second part is country or homeland betrayal. The third part is betrayal of guests and friends. And the fourth part is betrayal to God. As soon as they get there, Dante hears a voice say, "Be careful where you step, you may step on a sinner." To which Dante pulls back and realizes that he is standing on a giant frozen lake that has heads popping up out of it. And all of the heads are living people who are permanently frozen, unable to move from the neck down. As people cry, the tears freeze across their face, and it's so cold that several people have ears frozen off and are in a permanently pale state of existence. While walking and stepping over all of the heads, he comes across these 2 men who have their hair knotted together so they're forever touching forehead to forehead. Another soul explains that these are 2 brothers who killed themselves in the real world, so now they are forced to be stuck together and unable to do anything about it. Virgil then says they need to continue walking, as he says they are walking towards the center of this frozen lake, which is the center of hell itself. Now, something to explain about why the 9th layer is composed this way. The idea being the least offensive treason is that a family, because family is something that you're born into. So while you're still supposed to maintain ties, the love there isn't as strong as a love one would give to a friend or God. The second is country, because country is something that one, or at least Dante figured, someone should be so loyal to that it should surpass that of family. The third being friends and guests, because those are bonds that you have chosen to make and entirely rely on trust, so betraying that is a massive sin against humanity. And then finally, a treacherous act against God. The idea being that since God is perfect, any treacherous act comes from a pure place of malice on your behalf. So as they walk closer to the center, I can't really see in the writing a difference between, the ones who, because in the 8th tier there were individual trenches, it was easy to see, oh, these people, these people, these people. It seems like here it's just continuing and nothing's changed. The only mention was there was a line about the faces were purple, so maybe it's even colder here, but it's still just head sticking out, so whatever. While walking, Dante kicks someone's head on accident, who gets mad, and he's like, "Why are you torturing me? I'm being tortured enough, leave me alone." And whenever Dante asks him who he is, the head doesn't respond. So Dante gets down on the ground and grabs his hair and says, "If you don't tell me who you are, I'll rip your hair out." That is a wild change from the Dante that we saw an hour ago. This guy went from passing out at the thought of 2 people kind of floating around in the wind to now he's like, "If you don't tell me who you are, I'm gonna rip your frozen hairs off one by one." So as this is going on, a head nearby tells Dante that that man is a traitor to Florence. Dante does not like that one bit and tells the frozen man that he's going to write about him in his story, and everyone for all of history will know that he's a traitor to Florence, forever cursed to freeze in hell. He keeps walking and comes across two people who are frozen, one's head up against the back of another, and the one who's pressed up against the back is eating the head of the man in front of him. Dante kneels down and asks what this is all about, and to answer him, the guy that is eating the other guy wipes his mouth on the hair of the guy in front of him and then begins to tell his story. He tells Dante that he himself was a count, and the man whose head he's eating was an archbishop who in life condemned him and his sons into a dungeon where they all starved to death. He gives a grueling account of how he was thrown in there for betraying the city of Pisa, and even though he deserved the treachery, also throwing his sons in there was a treacherous act, and it's heavily, or at least he heavily implies, that he ate his sons as they were about to die, like that's how hungry he was. So he tells Dante, now the man is forever cursed to be the victim of my hunger, and then he just goes back to eating the guy's head. To which Dante, the takeaway he has from that is he stands up and he's like, Pisa is such a horrible city. I can't believe Pisa is this evil. Could you imagine that? And again, this is the thing that's so weird to me about this. He is in the 9th circle of hell. He has gone where quite literally no man has been before, standing above someone eating someone else's head for eternity. And he's like, man, Pisa really has to get their social climate in order. So then they continue on walking, and they get to the 3rd part of the 9th layer, which is the traitors to guess. Again, because that's entirely bounded on trust, and they broke that trust. These people are different because instead of frozen upright, they're frozen lying on their backs, which means not only do they not have anyone to look at and they never know who's around them, but whenever they cry, instead of the ice kind of pouring down like icicles, it covers their whole face until eventually they're stuck in this frozen mass. It's also at this point that Dante begins to feel a rush of wind, like a gentle breeze happening, and he asks Virgil what it is, and Virgil's like, we'll get to it when we get to it. One person who has their face completely frozen in tears asks Dante to help him, and Dante says he will if the man tells him his story. The man frozen on the ground explains that he is Friar Alberigio, which is someone that Dante knows back on Earth. The friar explains that he invited a guest over to his house and murdered him. Dante's confused though because the friar is still alive on Earth, to which the soul explains that if someone commits a sin so heinous that it puts them in the 9th circle of hell, the moment that they commit it, their soul is sucked to hell and their body is filled with a demon. And that's where possessions come from. This is an insanely cool concept to me, like the idea of souls being switched if someone commits an act so heinous against humanity. And guess what Dante's takeaway is from it? That's right, Italian politics. So then, remember, Dante made the deal, tell me who you are, I'll break the ice off your face. And then Dante goes, you know what? No, I'm not going to break the ice on your face. You know why? Because this is what you deserve. And then he stands up and recounts that this man is from Genoa, and he's like, Genoa is such a terrible place that a friar can be possessed and no one could tell the difference. Imagine living in Genoa. Wouldn't that be awful? Like the man just described, there are sins so heinous that a demon possesses your corpse, and now they exist in the realm of the living. And his takeaway is that Genoa, not the best place to live. They then continue walking, and Dante says they eventually get to a place where souls are completely frozen beneath the ice. As in not just their head sticking out and they cry, their entire body frozen forever in various positions that he can see beneath the ice as they walk across it. And then finally, they come to the 4th part of the 9th layer of hell, the bottom of the pit itself. As they get close, Virgil explains to Dante the wind that he was feeling earlier that's much stronger now is the wind off of Lucifer's wings as he flaps them. Whenever they get to Lucifer himself, he is massive. As a matter of fact, Dante says that he himself, Dante, is closer in size to the giants than the giants were to the size of Lucifer, implying him to be this monumental mountain-sized figure. Lucifer himself has 3 heads, the one on the right being a dark blackish color, the middle one being deep blood red, and the left one being a bright burning yellow. And from each of those faces pours blood and tears from the eyes that run down his body and create a sort of river. There are 4 people in this bottom pit of hell. The first, as mentioned, is Lucifer. Lucifer for betraying humanity and betraying God. The 2 on either sides of the heads are Brutus and Cassius. Now, that may not mean much to a lot of you, but for my boys who know about Rome, that's a pretty big deal. Brutus and Cassius are the 2 members of the Senate who conspired to murder Caesar. In other words, ending the original Roman Empire, which, as I mentioned earlier, Dante thought pretty highly of. So Caesar himself sat on a throne in the first circle of hell as such a great man, and now the 2 people who conspired to murder him and destroyed the Roman Empire are stuck here as well. The 2 of them hang within the right and left sides of Lucifer's heads, with their top half hanging out as they are constantly chewed, and Lucifer reaches up with claws and scratches them for all eternity. So non-stop within the mouth of Satan, snarling as he bites at you forever. And then finally, in the middle head of Lucifer, the most punished man in all of hell is Judas Iscariot. He is instead facing towards the throat of Lucifer, and Dante says he can see his spine and bones as all the skin has been stripped away. Judas is here for betraying Jesus Christ and leading to the crucifixion of Jesus. So not only for betraying Jesus himself, but for betraying humanity's second attempt at perfection. Virgil explains to Dante that now that they have made it to the bottom of hell and they've seen everything that needs to be seen, it's now time to climb their way out. So Virgil carries Dante on his back and waits for an opportune moment to grab onto the side of Lucifer and begin climbing up him. Virgil's climbing for a while before jumping off of Lucifer onto a rock face, and then Dante opens his eyes, and instead of seeing, Lucifer's chest as if he was climbing up, he sees Lucifer's legs sticking up as if everything's been flipped upside down. Virgil explains that this entire time they've been traveling towards the center of the earth, and now they've passed the barrier where gravity has flipped, and they are now climbing their way out. Virgil says that they are climbing their way to the southern hemisphere, which is almost entirely made of water. According to him, whenever Lucifer was cast out of heaven, all of the land moved away from him, and he shot a straight hole all the way from the heavens to the center of the earth, where he got stuck going through, and that's the reason he's now frozen, setting up, chewing on Brutus, Cassius, and Judas. So all that they have to do is tunnel their way out the hole that Lucifer originally made whenever he got shot in. The waters from the oceans, because again, as Virgil said, the land moved away from him, so now it's pretty much just water up there. The waters from these oceans burrow their way down, and Dante says that this water coming through is the river Lys from Greek mythology. And then they finally pop out, as Dante says, at the exact opposite point on Earth from where they started. So they made a direct line through the entire Earth, with the final line of Dante's Inferno being, "Thence we came forth to re-behold the stars," meaning they're finally out on the surface and can once again see the stars. Not only that, but they've popped out at the foot of Mount Purgatory, or in this legend, the mountain on which Purgatory exists, which makes sense at this time in history because, again, they hadn't really explored anything outside of their hemisphere, so they thought, well, if Purgatory is going to be anywhere, it might as well be on the other side of the earth. So them coming out on the surface at the foot of Mount Purgatory is the setup for the second part of Divine Comedy, Purgatorio. So after all of that, after I read and described to you the entirety of Dante's Inferno, how do I feel about it? It was alright. There are some interesting points while reading it. Like some conclusions I came to that I think are interesting, especially from a modern perspective. For one, and I mentioned this a lot, the journey of Dante from being pity to pious is so interesting to me. Because whereas we hear that whole thing near the end in Tier 9, with the guy with the frozen tears on his face, who Dante's like, if you tell me who you are, I'll uncover your face. And then after he tells him, Dante's like, no, you're a bad soul. You deserve to have your face covered in frozen tears forever. That is like a heroic moment. That is Dante's character arc from being weak and passing out to being like, nope, they deserve it. This is all right, and I'm following what God wants me to do by saying that they should suffer more. I like that idea. It was also really interesting, the ideas of like fame throughout the entire story, because it's like a cool concept by modern standards. It's wild that in the 1300s, Dante managed to have these ideas where these suffering souls are just like, please remember me, or just show me some form of remembrance, which was entirely out of character for any storytelling at the time. So I think it's really interesting to see it put forward as much here. And what's interesting is once he got to like the 8th and 9th layer of hell, they didn't want him to know who he was, because then it goes from fame to infamy. Also, there's kind of the combined message that you probably picked up on listening to this, that Dante had a very heightened sense of Christianity above everything else. Like, yeah, he had all the Greek and the Roman gods, and like you mentioned Muhammad, that's an Islamic figure, right, and all that, but they're all within his idea of what hell is in the Christian canon. So therefore it's like, yeah, you know, you can all be real, whatever, but you're in my hell. So, as well as the entire story itself being both a political and personal tool. Like, it's a political tool in the fact of like the army he's waging against. He's like, oh, you don't like me? Well, King Frederick II is in the heretic level of hell now. And oh, you think he's your actual king? Well, I guess you're wrong. Oops. And also the personal stuff, like not only the fact that Virgil, his hero, basically guides him through the whole journey, but the fact all these other poets and his old teacher are like, wow, you're so great, you're so smart. And the woman he loved in life being the angel that comes down to him. Like, it's weird that for the time, I think about him like, yeah, that's fine, like 1300, whatever. But it's hilarious writing tropes by today's standards. I made the joke biblical fanfic, but it really got that way sometimes. Like, I don't know. It's so weird because you would think from a storytelling perspective, and it's not like this is Dante's first story either. He wrote a bunch of other stuff. But you would think from a storytelling perspective, there would be this hindrance to add so many personal layers to it. But personally, I think part of his bitterness, because he was exiled at this time, came through in this story where he's just like, well, this person's in hell and this one is too. And I get the girl and all the poets say they love me. And like, the whole feeling of this sort of malevolent benevolence exists throughout the story, because he talks about all these people suffering and how it's good. Like even the inscription on the gate of hell at the beginning, where it talks about divine justice and primal love made me. And the idea like everything you're about to see is exactly what they get and it's what they deserve. And like, honestly, Dante's entire character journey was coming to terms with that fact. It's like the opening inscription on the gate is the end destination for his character. And not only that, but with things like the inscription on the gate, the power of words has such an important, like, it's an asset in this story, because there's so many, and I made jokes about it, but anytime something happens, Virgil's like, God sent us, and they just get what they want. And like when it came to the city, whenever the angel had to come and tap open the door, like the one time words didn't work, an angel did it, and every other time words did what they needed it to. And all these souls who have been suffering in hell for who knows how long just want Dante to talk about them in his poetry, which, yeah, kind of haughty to be in a story and be like, but these souls were relieved to know that I, the great Dante, would write about them. But it does show how Dante valued words and ideas, which whenever you're reading it kind of gives you an idea for why he included a lot of the details he did. For example, Dante thinks of poetry and writing as these great standings of moral character, so whenever he writes about someone being in hell, he wants that to be seen as a big deal. So how did I feel about it? By a modern standard, if someone wrote this today, I would be like, it's like okay, right? Because it's still interesting, the concepts of hell, but in other times, it's incredibly biased, not only with things I mentioned, like who goes to the 7th layer of hell is really weird and like old world philosophy thinking, but also with details about like who is in those layers of hell specifically, like all of them across the board. It's, like I said, it's a political tool, a lot of it. And a lot of the times the stories like this, you got to realize, you know, Dante was part of a war. there are people who take some of this too seriously. A good example of it is William Shakespeare's The Tragedy of Julius Caesar, which is a fantastic play, and Shakespeare is a great writer, but people have taken that story and they have made that their history, right? Like, they have taken that opinion and been like, yeah, this is what happened. They were definitely remorseful for it, and Mark Antony definitely felt this way about it, and all that stuff. And people do that with Dante's Inferno sometimes. Like, they'll read it and they'll read about these old popes and be like, I guess Pope Nicholas III was just an evil guy. Wherein, you know, history is more complicated than just Dante's opinion of it. So it's weird that it's kind of become like a historical footnote, and understandably because of how big of a piece it is. But it's weird that the facts that Dante says in it itself have kind of become not canonical, so to speak, but revered. And I think that's kind of weird, but whatever. But I will say, for the time that it was written, this thing is an absolute masterpiece. To have no knowledge of these greater concepts of fear and horror and body disfigurement, and I'm talking about this from like a horror guy perspective, or like a film bro perspective, you could say. Like, the ideas of these body amalgamations and the transformation scene I kind of ragged on because he talked it up, but in all honesty, it was like an insanely weird scene to describe. Things that would be insane for a modern director to get across, the fact he did it in 1317 blows my mind. And like, these descriptions of hell, like I mentioned, are incredibly relevant today, not only in things like video games, like there's a Dante's Inferno video game, but stuff like As Above, So Below, or the majority of depictions of hell that use one, if not more, of these elements to get their point across. For what it is, I think it's incredibly interesting, and whenever there's something like this, I love going back to the source and seeing like where it all came from. Because even in reading this, and I once again want to emphasize, I have not only Dante's Inferno itself linked in the description, but a sort of Spark Notes guide to help you understand, because a lot of the English is older English. But while reading it, there were so many elements I found that I couldn't mention all in this video that made me go, oh, that's where this comes from. That's where that idea comes from. And as much as I rag on him, as much as there's ridiculous stuff in the story for nowadays, for what it was at the time, it was a marvel. And I think it's something that should still be looked at today, and I enjoyed reading it. But you know, I enjoyed even more than reading it? That's right, talking to you guys about it. And I hope that you enjoyed, and thank you for watching. It is the start of Halloween, and there's going to be more like direct line Halloween stuff, like horror ARGs and all that coming out soon. But like, I've wanted to cover this for a while, and was kind of putting it off, and I'm like, October's a good time to do it, because it is spooky. There's a lot of spooky ideas in there, body horror stuff and all that. So I wanted to do it now, and hopefully you enjoyed. I have absolutely no idea what this video is going to cut down to. It has been, it's currently 6 in the morning. I've been recording since like 2 a.m. It's been 4.5 hours. So I have no idea what this will cut down to. So hopefully you, also if you're surprised by that time that I've been recording, that's just how YouTubers operate. Ask anyone. There is no sleep. But thank you all so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. I love talking about this stuff. Like, I like weird history and I like weird horror, and this is like a good mix of the two. And it was so fun to research. And like, this is a thing that I've been blessed with because of you guys. I don't want to enforce it, but there are people who make the dad jokes, and sometimes I do feel like a dad. Because I'll be researching and, for example, get to, what was one in this video? Oh, the Suicide Forest thing, where like, Suicide Forest, where the trees are like bodies and all that. I was reading about that, and I'm like, man, I can't wait to tell everyone. Because like, I get excited to relay this information to you guys, because you all are always so funny in the comments and say the funniest stuff about it. And I love not, because it used to be I would find this stuff and be like, that's neat, and then never be able to talk about it. And now I can talk about it, and like, you guys enjoy it, and that's so cool to me. So I hope that you enjoyed this, and I love that I have the ability and the blessing to be able to tell you about it. So I know I say thank you for watching a lot, but thank you for watching. Thank you so much for subscribing to all my subscribers. I think we broke 640,000, which is something like 20,000 subs over the last video. And like, at the rate you guys are doing it, I can't, like, it's none of it's real at this point. Like, If it seems like I'm less reactive now than I was in previous milestones, that's because this is all fake now, and I'm just imagining it, and this is all a fever dream. But thank you for supporting that dream. I also want to say, above all else, a massive thank you to my patrons. Thank you to my top patrons that you can see here. I love you guys so much. You give me the ability to do this. You give me the ability to do this full time. And the fact that I can bring videos like this to you and then people support me monetarily means more than I could ever describe. So thank you all so much for that. So upcoming, it's going to be spooky videos for the rest of the month. I know I've got an ARG to cover that actually may be out before this. I'm not sure yet. I'm not sure what after that, but we'll see. However, I hope whatever comes, I hope that you enjoy. And that should do it. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. And I will see you in the next one. Bye! Hello everybody, today we're going to be breaking down the second part of Divine Comedy, also known as Dante's Purgatorio, as well as breaking down the 7 levels of Purgatory within the story. If you've seen what is technically the first part of this series, my video about Dante's Inferno, then this picks up immediately where that left off. But if you haven't seen it, then this video will still work, as it's an explanation of Dante and Virgil's journey through Purgatory, as well as explaining what Purgatory is within the Catholic canon at the time of Dante's writing, as well as a look at the souls that Dante says are there, and the symbolism of the story itself, and what happens to the sinners on each level of Purgatory, etc. I'll be honest, I think I like Purgatorio more than I like Inferno. Everyone talks about Inferno because it has the horror elements and it's scary and has cool illustrations of people being tortured, but as far as a story and what happens to the characters in the story and the symbolism and all that, I think Purgatorio is a better work. I mean, technically they're both sections of the same book, so, you know, it's all one work, but that's not important. You know what is important? Look at that. That's pretty neat. It's way bigger than the silver one, and I'm kind of afraid it's going to fall and take out everything beneath it, including 2 little me's. But that's okay if it does, because you all put that up there, and you're the reason that that's there, and you're the reason this channel's here, and I really do appreciate it. So thank you, and thank you for that. So if you're interested, stick around as we're going to break down the story of penance and redemption in Dante's Purgatorio. But before we get into that, if you like this video, then you probably like the concept of someone sitting here and explaining something to you in a very interested and exciting manner. Hopefully. But personally, I have trouble watching YouTube sometimes, even as someone who makes YouTube videos, because I always feel I'm not being productive enough. Well, I'm here to tell you that you can combine those 2 aspects and make your free time productive and entertaining thanks to today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of members and classes spread across over 150 countries. It's an excellent place to get inspired, learn new skills, and then put them to good use. For example, I've been having trouble with working my camera. So I hopped onto Skillshare, typed in the name of my camera, and found an entire class by Ben Rowlands breaking down how to use it and how to adjust the settings for what I needed to do. And thanks to Ben and Skillshare, I was able to get this quality out of my camera that you're seeing right now, which, not to brag, but I think looks pretty nice. So from there, I decided to type in horror to see what comes up, and I found dozens of classes about how to write compelling horror stories and design interesting, scary characters. And if you're interested in starting and growing your YouTube channel, there are literally thousands of videos on the topic and more being made every day. And Skillshare has learning opportunities for everything from art to growing your social media presence to improving your business to advertising and anything else you could want to do with your time. Skillshare is also entirely ad-free, so as you're learning all of this information and becoming engaged with the people telling it, you don't have to worry about being taken out of the zone. And new premium classes are being launched each week, and they now have subtitles in Spanish, French, Portuguese, and German. So right now, you can get in on Skillshare and begin learning about whatever it is you want, either for your business, personal life, or something in between. And today, you can start learning for free because the first 1,000 people that go to Skillshare at the link in the description will get 1 month free. That's right, the first 1,000 people to click the link get 1 month free and can begin learning about all their favorite classes, meeting new creators, and getting better at whatever it is you want to do. For me, it was the camera and quality you're seeing now, and for you, it can be the same or whatever else you like. Thank you all so much for watching the ad. Thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring the video. It really does mean the most. I hope you all check them out. I learned a lot, and hopefully you can too at the link in the description. And we are back to the video. We are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. As a super brief rundown of Inferno, if you didn't see that video or are familiar with the work, in it, Dante and a guide by the name of Virgil, who is an ancient Roman poet, walk through the 9 layers of hell in order to get out and continue their path towards heaven. Inferno ended with Dante and Virgil making their way out the bottom of the earth and onto a mountain on the southern hemisphere called Mount Purgatory. And that is exactly where this story begins, so let's get into it. Now in this story, since Mount Purgatory is on the other side of the earth, the stars move a bit differently than they do for everyone else. Basically, from their position, they can see the stars at all points during the day. And during the day, Dante makes note that there are 4 stars appearing in the daylight sky. Now, I'm not going to be able to cover all of the symbolism because, believe me, there is a ton, and I'm sure I missed some of it, but I am going to talk about the things that I noticed. Or also things that people on the internet who are smarter than me noticed as well. During the time of Dante's writing, there was an important idea within the Catholic Church known as the 7 virtues. Now these virtues have changed and morphed over time to be completely different for what they were at the time of Dante's writing, but at the time it was believed that 4 of the virtues, known as the cardinal virtues, were achievable by anyone, regardless if they were a believer or not. While there were 3 spiritual virtues that could only be achieved if someone was a follower of God. The 4 cardinal virtues were those of justice, prudence, temperance, and fortitude. While the 3 spiritual virtues were faith, hope, and love, or instead of love, charity in some cases. As we're going to see, Mount Purgatory is for sinners who committed an action on earth and are now trying to receive forgiveness for it in the afterlife. So the significance of 4 stars in the daylight hours is to symbolize that this is change that they themselves as people can obtain without having to look to a higher power, because that comes later. As Dante is looking at the stars and pondering this, a man comes up to Dante and Virgil and asks what they're doing there. Virgil tells Dante to kneel in reverence as the man identifies himself as Cato. Virgil says to Cato that they were sent by Beatrice, who was sent from God, to continue along this path, and as in every case before, Cato lets them pass. However, before they can begin their ascent up the mountain, Virgil takes Dante to a riverside where he literally washes hell from his face. And also, yada yada, baptism, symbolism, moving on. As Dante is standing up, a very bright ship is seen coming onto the shore with an angel standing at the front of it with its wings pointed up towards heaven. This ship is transporting souls to the afterlife, and from the ship, Virgil and Dante can hear people singing hymns and choruses. Think about the stark contrast between this, an angel leading a bright glowing ship and everyone singing, versus the river Styx that was seen in Inferno, where everyone's crying and freaking out and the guy's yelling at them and hitting people with a paddle. One figure, a man by the name of Casella, recognizes Dante as they were friends from back home in Florence, and the 2 of them begin singing songs together before Cato tells them not to squander their time and to get moving up the mountain. It's here that I have to start, and I hate to say this, reeling back on some of the criticisms that I said in Inferno. And to be completely honest, I didn't really mean a lot of those criticisms. Like, I really loved the story and thought it was cool, and I was saying a lot of stuff to be funny, and don't worry, I'm gonna keep doing that. But in Purgatorio specifically, there were so many moments that I just kind of had to sit there and be like, alright, that's pretty cool. One of which being in this scene when Virgil and Dante are beginning their first trek up the mountain. Something I didn't really point out as much as I should have in Inferno is how dark everything was. And I mean, like, quite literally, it was hard for them to see all of the time. As a matter of fact, one of the only reasons that Dante is able to see anything throughout the story is because they come across so many instances of things being on fire. So now that he's standing out in the daylight for the first time since the forest at the beginning of Inferno, he looks down and notices that Virgil doesn't have a shadow. As a matter of fact, no one has a shadow besides him. Virgil explains to Dante that this is because things like light and shadows are aspects of the physical body, whereas the spiritual body or the soul is not limited to the affairs of man. And while yes, the soul does have the physical appearance of the body, that's only because whenever the two are joined together at the beginning, they take on characteristics of each other. The soul taking on the physical appearance of the body, and the body taking on the spiritual attributes of the soul. And throughout the rest of the story, the way that souls identify Dante as not being dead yet is because he has a shadow. That's like an insanely creative concept by today's standards, much less the 1300s when this was written. During the course of this discussion, Dante is confused and says he's having trouble grasping what that means, to which Virgil remarks that that tends to be the nature of man. They simply ask questions over and over and can never truly know what it is they should just accept. Even making the note that the philosophers who were mentioned in Limbo at the beginning of Inferno are forever trapped to never know the true nature of the punishment that befalls them. Which that in itself is such a crazy concept. The idea that these people chase the exact answers for what things mean instead of working towards a more better version of themselves, and for it they're forever forced to be stuck in this limbo where they won't know what it means. Alright, I'm being too nice to the story. I need to hurry up so we can find something to make fun of. Maybe he'll mention Florence, that's always funny. As they begin to work their way up the mountain, they come across several people who are laying around the rocks at the base of the mountain, and after speaking to them, Dante realizes that these are all people who have been excommunicated from the church. Specifically, one man by the name of Manfred says that however long you were excommunicated, you are forced to be on this layer of purgatory for 30 times that length of time. So if you were kicked out of the church for the last 2 years of your life, well, that's 60 years on the rocks of Mount Purgatory. Now, while there are 7 layers of purgatory, and they are a clearly defined 7 layers, there's kind of 9 because this beginning part is like 2 starter or sub-layers. So with that being the case, this first sub-layer is kind of that for stubbornness. In other words, people who were slow or lackadaisical with their means of salvation. For example, one person they meet there by the name of Belequa believed and repented for his sins on his deathbed. And according to him, he has to spend the length of his life on earth here on the shores of Purgatory, which seems to be inhabited by people who were stubborn, or in other words, died without giving a final repentance or confession. For example, one of the people on this layer say that they died a very bloody battle in war, but before the battle did not think to confess their sins. The souls of this layer realize that Dante has a shadow, and they immediately begin pleading with him that if he goes back to Earth, to ask people to pray for them. He then meets a man by the name of Sordello, who was a 13th century poet in Italy, who begins to talk about Italian politics and how Florence is going to crumble at the hands of their current leaders, and I told you he'd go back to talking about Florence. Alright, so at this point, it would probably help to make sure we're all on the same page if I explain what the purpose of Purgatory is. And I want to emphasize, yes, I know Purgatory is a thing in most Catholic beliefs, however, this was written in the 1300s, so don't apply things I'm saying then to mean how it really is, especially with Dante's interpretation of it being like a literal mountain. During Inferno, the people who were mentioned to be in hell were people who had done horrific acts in their life to others, or people who didn't believe in God. Purgatory is for people who did believe in God and just had sin in their life that they need to overcome, and the sins of Purgatory are more based on ideas of character flaws rather than open violence and harm for others. Because of that, the layers of Mount Purgatory are based on the 7 deadly sins, because each of those sins are about things people feel within themselves that cause them to do wrong. Which leads to the core difference between Purgatory and Hell. In Hell, there is no escape and you are doomed to suffer there forever, whereas in Purgatory, there is a way out. At the entrance of hell, it said, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." Because once you're punished there, the purpose of your punishment is just that, suffering. Whereas in Purgatory, the punishments that we're going to see are temporary, because if someone can get through it and their soul be cleansed, they are then deemed worthy of traveling into heaven. We'll get more into the weeds of it as we get to the different levels of Purgatory, but whenever you hear about different people either having some form of contentment or talking about how they need to get through the suffering, it's because once they're done with that, they're then allowed to cross into heaven. With the people in these two pre-levels that I talked about earlier having to endure a waiting time before they can even be judged. And even though the story doesn't specifically go into detail about what happens to the people on these two pre-levels, from my understanding, once that one character spends his entire lifetime on Earth in Purgatory, he can then either go into heaven if he had a pure soul, or begin his penance on one of the 7 tiers. Regardless, Dante and Virgil continue on their path and are nearly to the entrance of the first layer of Purgatory. However, as they're almost there, night begins to set in, and Virgil says it's a rule that no one is allowed to climb the mountain without the presence of the sun. Now this is obviously symbolic of the Son of God, because as in the story, no one is allowed to climb the mountain without it being daylight. No one is able to climb the mountain at all if it wasn't before Jesus dying on the cross. Also, cool side note, because they're on the southern hemisphere and they thought the Earth was tilted differently than it is, the sun always stays in the north and simply goes up and then goes back down. As the night comes, Dante also realizes that the 4 stars in the sky have disappeared and now there are 3 stars. If you'll remember earlier, this is a mention of the 3 spiritual virtues. During the day, the sinners work to achieve what they can with their own merit, which is the cardinal virtues, and now that it's nighttime, the spiritual virtues watch over them. During the night, all of the souls begin singing songs and hymns. Dante noticed that the only 2 people he can see that are not is that of King Henry and Emperor Rudolph. Both, as Virgil says, 2 people who were too focused on earthly matters and therefore lost out on spiritual goods. And this is the next point where I have to just take a moment to say, this is really cool. Every night in Purgatory, the snake from the Garden of Eden comes out and tries to tempt more sinners to turn their backs on God. However, here in Purgatory, every night, 2 angels descend from heaven to fight off the serpent. Dante notices that the swords of these angels are broken at the tip and seem very blunt. Virgil says this is because the battle has been going on for thousands of years, and whenever the swords are finally destroyed, it will be time for Judgment Day to come. That's just like such a really cool detail, to say that the serpent is to this day trying to trick sinners to fall away from the path of God, but now angels are fighting him, and when the swords break, it's the end times, and that's just neat. Moving on. Like, I'll be honest, some of the stuff in this story made me feel bad for being harsh in the first one, and like, even then it was a joke. I loved Inferno, and I was just having fun, but especially near the end of this story, I felt guilty. So Dante decides to go to sleep, and during his sleep, he has his first of 3 dreams throughout this story. In the first dream, he sees a golden eagle pick him up and begin to soar him high above the clouds. However, once it gets too close to the sun, he begins to burn up before he wakes up. Keep that in mind. I'll talk about dream symbolism at the end, but just hold on to that for now. When Dante wakes up, he is lying in front of a large gate, to which Virgil says he was carried by Saint Lucy. In front of the gate of Purgatory, there stands an angel holding a sword, and in front of that angel are 3 steps. The steps are in order from Dante to the door: a marble stair, a stone stair, and a red gemstone stair. And my personal interpretation, or at least the interpretation I agree with, is that it's that of salvation. The marble stair being man's original condition as a beautiful, untouched thing. The stone stair being what happens to man whenever sin comes into it and makes it into an ugly stone. And the red gemstone being the idea of the blood covering it and making it into something beautiful again. The angel asks the men what they are doing there, and especially Dante, considering that he's not even dead yet, to which Virgil says they have been sent by Beatrice on a path from God.